Shabbat Shalom. It is so exciting to be starting a new cycle of the Torah reading with Parshat Bereishit. And in Parashat Bereishit, we read about the story of creation. How God, over the period of 6 days, creates the world. And that final creation, act of creation, is man. We then read about Shabbat. And then we go into the details. And two stories jump out while we're reading through this parashah. The first one is the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There we have the story of the serpent. And what exactly that means is far beyond the topics of a little drosha. But one thing is seen. When Eve eats from the tree, and she gives the fruit to Adam, and when God appears to them and says, Ayeka, where are you? The response of Adam is to blame his wife. And when God says to Eve, what happened? She blames the serpent. They pass the buck. They're not prepared to accept responsibility. Later on in the parasha, the next generation, we see the story of Cain and Able. And once again, we have Cain very frustrated that God accepts Abel's offering but not his. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, be very careful because the sin is at the gates. Don't let the sin in. Cain murders Abel. And God appears to him and says, where's Abel? And Cain offers those immortal words. Hashomer and Rachi Anochi. Am I my brother's keeper? I have no idea where he is. It's not me. And only when God punishes Cain is Cain willing to own up and accept the consequences of his actions. Owning the mistake. How difficult is that? To be able to say, my fault. Throughout history, we find this event, this challenge of being able to own one's errors so difficult. Later on in the Tanakh, in the Bible, we have a story of two kings, King Saul and King David. King Saul and David both sin. But Saul loses the kingship, and David keeps the kingship for generation to generation. And when we look at the stories, we are confounded, because the sin of Saul seems to be quite minor. In the story of Saul, he receives a command from the prophet Samuel, destroy the nation of Amalek. Saul does what he's supposed to do, but he keeps the king alive. He wants to have a public execution to proclaim God and to honor God. At the end of the day, the king is killed. But he delays. King David is involved with the story of Bathsheba. And although the sages explain that it wasn't really adultery, we still have to deal with the consequences of a king of Israel taking someone else's wife. So on the scale of sin, one would assume that what David did is far worse than what Saul did. And that may be true. But the Bible tells us something else. That is not what you did, but are you willing to own the mistake? When the prophet Samuel comes to Saul and says to him, Mayor, what is the sound I'm hearing? And Saul's response is, did I do good? I've done so amazing. I did it he told me to do. I've even kept the king alive, got a public execution. And Samuel says, but that's not what you're supposed to do. Yeah, but I thought it'd be better to have a public, but that's not what you're supposed to do. You broke protocol. And only 3 or 4 times later, Saul is able to see that he actually has made a mistake, and he's off and asks for forgiveness. King David, after he's been with Bathsheba, and he gets rid of Uriah, the prophet Nathan appears before him and lambasts him. And immediately King David owns the mistake. He said, I lie, it was me. I accept the consequences and responsibility for my actions. The prophet Natan says to him immediately, because you're willing to accept it and own your error, Hashem will forgive, God will forgive you, and your kingship will endure. From the dawn of time, the Bible is telling us, the Torah is telling us, that man is going to make a mistake. We are going to err, whether it is being a seduction via the serpent, whether it is anger, whether it is whatever the reason, we are going to slip up. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is our response? Are we willing to own our mistake or run from our mistake? How often do we see politicians, friends, people that we know, and they do something wrong? The ones who try and justify and run away and hide and deny, they always lose in the long run. Those who are willing to say, Chatati, I fell, I made a mistake, please forgive me, generally you will forgive. When our children do the wrong thing, when do we forgive? When do we punish them? When do we forgive them? It is only when they don't take ownership of what they've done that we respond far more critically than when they do. The Torah, God asks Adam, Ayeka, where are you? What have you done? If he had said, I mucked it up, I'm sorry, history may have seen Adam and Eve remain in the garden. Learn to own your mistake. Shabbat Shalom.